That ship has sailed. We're done. We're going to implode. The years of low inflation are over. A lot of people are going to lose a lot of money this time, and we've all suffered, whether we realize it or not. If you look back at the days where the pound really dominated global trade, Britain was an empire. Think about how much influence Britain had all around the world. It's just another country now. So Britain is a shadow of what it used to be. It doesn't have anywhere near the economic or military power that it once had when it had that position. So to say that, oh, it was easy for Britain. I mean, imagine what happens when America is just another country. It's going to be a big difference. But I think that our economy structurally is more screwed up than the British economy was. We're extremely dependent on the dollar status.
Are we in a worse position because of the debt crisis? What makes it worse now?
And the structure of our economy. We're so dependent. This service sector economy that can't exist unless it's supplied by the rest of the world. And when the pound was the dominant currency, it was backed by gold. I mean, it was a real money. They couldn't just print it like we've been doing. The dollar's the reserve currency, even though it's backed by absolutely nothing.
Winston Churchill said the biggest mistake he ever made was reattaching their currency to gold. Because now seeing how much power it gives America to just print. And this is like the thesis of my argument. You can get away with this shit for so long that the people that pay the price didn't create the problem. And so just emotionally, nobody has to go through, oh my God, we really crippled ourselves and we made it impossible for ourselves to print our way out of this problem.
That's one of the reasons that politicians hate gold, is it forces them to be honest. That's the last thing that a politician wants to be. They don't get elected telling the truth. And if they've been in office for a long time, it's because they're very good liars, because that's how you get reelected. But the public wants gold because we want to keep the politicians honest.
I don't think the public understands gold.
They've been deliberately confused about it by a government that doesn't want the public to understand it, because the government wants to be in charge of the money so that they can manipulate and tax us and try to tinker with the economy in ways that might make their reelection easier. And so we're not on gold standard. Again, it's like kids at a high school prom. They don't want the chaperones because they want to do a lot of things that the chaperones won't approve of. But the parents want the chaperones because they don't want the kids doing that stuff. That's why they're there. So gold is like the chaperone to keep the politicians and the bankers honest, but that's not what they want. They want to be up to no good, and gold stands in their way. That's why if you look at Alan Greenspan's essay, Gold and Economic Freedom, and he wrote this years before he became Fed chairman, but he does a great job of explaining this concept. Gold and economic freedom go hand in hand. We want honest money. We want sound money. I mean, money is supposed to have real value. It's not supposed to just be conjured into existence out of thin air by a central bank. You get absolute power over the monetary system. This is what happens. But human nature is one thing that doesn't change. I mean, we're more sophisticated now. We have a lot more technology now, but that hasn't changed. We haven't learned from the mistakes of the past. We just keep on repeating them in an endless loop.
Knowing what's going on right now, knowing that people are getting this short-term lunch for free through the inflation of the money supply, that we've just been pumping money into it. What do you think in terms of things like the banking crisis? Are we at the beginning of this? Is this something that is over? Have we stabilized? Do we have a bigger problem coming? Like, what does the nature of the situation tell you about where that's going?
The way you make a lot of money as an investor is you figure out where everybody else is wrong, and then you take the opposite side of that trade. Because that's how you can make the most amount of money, because you've identified something in the market where there's a mispricing, because the market is wrong. There's an idea of the efficient market that everything is priced right because everybody has the information and that's all reflected in price. But if everybody is wrong, if everybody thinks something and you know that they're wrong, the price is going to be wrong. Either it's too high or too low. And the way people made money shorting subprime, and not that many people made money because most people took the other side of the trade. They were buying the mortgages. They couldn't figure out the problem. But you had all these people who believed that housing prices could only go up and that these bonds would never default, because who would ever default on a mortgage? Because the price would go up and the bank could just sell the property and get their money back. And people, oh, they're guaranteed or they're high rated, and everybody believed that S&P or Moody's or Fitch or whatever. And so you had this bubble in home mortgages and people didn't care. Hey, nothing down, negative AM, teaser loan. I mean, standards went out the window because people just thought that these loans would never go bad. And to me, this was sheer lunacy. I was like, this is an accident waiting to happen. And so it was like, by betting against that, and eventually, all of a sudden in 2007, the bottom dropped out because people figured it out. It took a while, but when they did, the mortgage market collapsed. People lost a lot of money who owned mortgages. Banks failed. I mean, a lot of money would have been lost, but a few people who bet that this was going to happen made money. It made a lot of money because not that many other people made the same bet. If people ask me, okay, well, what do you see now that reminds you of the mortgage market back then? Where is everybody wrong? And how do I make money betting that they're wrong? They've been wrong for a long time, but I think that the big thing now is the market's belief that the Fed is going to be able to engineer this soft landing, that the Fed could take the inflation rate back down to 2%, and it's going to stay there indefinitely. Just like we had, 10 years or whatever years of 2% inflation as measured by the CPI, that the Fed is going to be able to bring inflation back down to that level so that it can reduce interest rates, which are now at a 16-year high. And they're still not that high. They're going a lot higher. But that these high rates are just temporary because that it's enough to put the inflation genie back in the bottle. And so the Fed's going to be able to cut rates back down and everything is going to be fine, because inflation is going to be vanquished and we're going to go back to these low interest rates that everybody needs. The reason everybody needs low interest rates is because everybody has so much debt. Why does everybody have so much debt? Because interest rates were so low. Because the Federal Reserve kept interest rates so artificially low, it encouraged people to keep borrowing more and more money. And not just people, the government, federal government, state governments, corporations, everybody is loaded up with debt because the government artificially suppressed interest rates. Had they not done that, had the government not done quantitative easing, not blown up its balance sheet, interest rates would have been much, much higher over the last 20 years than they were. And as a result of that, we'd have much less debt. People would not have borrowed so much money. They wouldn't have started up a bunch of harebrained companies that really have no chance of success. We wouldn't have these zombie companies. Individuals wouldn't have bought so much on credit. They would have actually saved because they could have got interest on their savings. So we'd have more savings. We'd have less debt. We have a much healthier economy. We'd have a more productive economy. But because of what the Fed did, the economy's all screwed up. Now, the market just thinks that we can go right back to where we were. They're wrong. That ship has sailed. We're done. The years of low inflation are over. They're not coming back. There is so much inflation in the pipeline. And the dollar is going to start to really fall the minute the Fed stops hiking or indicates that it's done. And that's going to really accelerate the increase in prices. And you have the world now de-dollarizing. We actually sped up the process with the sanctions against Russia, which was one of the dumbest things that Biden did, was punish Russia for doing exactly what we needed to do. Russia was holding a lot of its reserves in US dollars and US treasuries, which is exactly what we need the world to do so we can export our inflation. And we punished them for doing that. We said, you know what, we're going to take that away from you. And we're going to deny you access to the SWIFT system. And we basically told the whole world, de-dollarize or we got you by the balls. We could do the same thing to you. That was a wake-up call for the world. We need an alternative to the dollar. When they have an alternative, we're SOL. We're going to implode. The markets are basically assuming that interest rates go down, inflation goes down, and so stocks are overpriced, bonds are overpriced, gold is underpriced, the dollar is overpriced. You have all these prices that are wrong because investors are betting on an impossible outcome because they don't understand all the mistakes that the Fed made since the 2008 financial crisis. In fact, they didn't understand the mistakes that they made before the crisis. That's why they didn't realize it was coming. I understood those mistakes. That's why I warned about the crisis in advance. And I know everything they've done since that crisis was a mistake too and made the problem worse. And the stuff that we did with COVID exacerbated the problem. But I think the markets are going to correct this, just like they corrected the housing and the mortgage market. A lot of people are going to lose a lot of money this time, but a lot of the losses are going to be in real terms because of inflation. So there's two ways you can lose money, right? You could just actually lose your money, right? I have $100,000 and I invested it and I've got $20,000 left, right? I lost $80,000. But what if you don't lose any of your money? You still have your $100,000, but prices go up 5 times because of inflation. Well, I still have 100,000, but it feels like I got 20,000. I lost 80% of my purchasing power to inflation. Most of the losses that I think people are going to have to endure are going to be of that variety. They still have their money, but they don't have much value. Everything costs so much more. Yeah, your bank doesn't fail. You still have your money, but you can't buy much with it. So it's not that big a consolation to have a bunch of money that's practically worthless. A lot of people believe that capitalism is evil, but capitalism is the least evil economic system that exists. I mean, this is probably because the teachers don't understand this either. And so we have a bunch of kids that learn bad things from teachers who don't get it in these government schools. But it's socialism that's inherently evil, not capitalism. Capitalism is about freedom. It's where individuals are free to transact with one another and pursue their self-interest without government intervention. Now, people think, well, then people are just going to exploit other people and take advantage of them and screw them over. That's not how it works. Because if I want to enrich myself in a system of voluntary interaction, I can't force anybody to buy my products. If I want somebody's money, I have to earn their money. I can't force them. I'm not a government. I can't tax them. I can't take stuff from them against their will. I have to convince them that it's in their self-interest to buy what I want to sell. If I want to hire somebody, I have to pay them more than anybody else is willing to pay them. Or I have to give them a combination of pay and benefits and a work environment where they voluntarily accept my offer of employment. I can't conscript them into service like the government at a draft. I can't force you to work for me. I have to give you a deal that you decide to take because it's better than somebody else's deal. And so everybody is acting with one another voluntarily. Capitalists, the way you get rich is I try to figure out, hey, what is something that would make everybody's life better? What do we need that a lot of people don't have? And if they had it, their life would be better. And then I come up with something, or maybe I come up with something, you didn't even realize you wanted it until I showed it to you. And then when you saw it, oh my God, my life would be so much better if I had that. And then you buy it from me and I get rich because I made your life better. I'm getting rewarded for improving your life. That's capitalism. We all get rewarded for making everybody else's lives better. And it's all about voluntary exchange and interaction. There's no coercion. Nobody is forced to do something that they don't want to do. Compare that to socialism or government. The government forces people to do stuff whether they want to do it or not. Here's this law. You have to abide by that. You can't do this. You must do that. You have to pay that. You can't do this. This is coercion. This is force. And the government can say, and we're going to take all this money away from you. We don't have to earn your money. We're just taking it. And if you don't give it to us, we're going to put you in jail. There's no businessman that can put you in jail if you don't buy their product or accept their employment offer. They have to entice you to buy their stuff. And so I want to live in a world where people have to win my business, where they have to improve my life, not where they can ruin my life and put me in jail if I don't do what they tell them to do. That's socialism. And when people think, well, people are inherently evil, they're going to cheat. They're going to try to rip me off and give me poison food and shoddy merchandise. Some people will do that, right? Some people are going to cut corners and try to pull a fast one. And some people will commit fraud in the marketplace. They'll lie about something. But those people are not going to be hugely successful businessmen. The free market will weed them out. They'll go out of business. People will tell their friends and they'll get bad reviews and eventually they're going to go away. They may make some money in the short run, but if you want to build a good reputation and have a lasting business, you don't do it by ripping off your customers. You do it by serving your customers so they keep coming back and they don't go to your competitor. But yes, there's going to be some bad apples in capitalism. But you know what? There's even more bad apples in socialism. Why people think that businessmen are greedy, but they trust politicians. Those people in government are as greedy as anybody. They want to make money too, but now they have power over you. Now they can make money through corruption, through graft. And if you want to look at these socialist countries, who are the wealthiest people? The people that work for government. They have all the money. They have all the stuff. There's a huge divide. They say, oh, it's going to be equal. Everybody's going to be equal. Yeah, everybody is equally poor except the people who work for government and they're rich. And they get rich by stealing money from the public. But in capitalism, people get rich by serving the public. And there's a much better distribution of wealth in capitalism than socialism because you have a middle class. Capitalism created the American middle class. Without capitalism, there wouldn't have been a middle class, right? There would just been a bunch of poor people and then some rich bureaucrats at the top that were sucking the lifeblood out of everybody else. You don't get rich by hoarding your money because if your money is hoarded, it doesn't grow. The way people get rich is by investing their money, by creating economic growth, by producing more products, providing more employment. So the last thing you want to do is take that wealth away from the rich because they use it so productively. They're not just sitting on a pile of cash in their backyard. Their wealth is out there working and growing the economy. But the reason that we have so much less upward mobility than we could have is because of all the roadblocks that government has placed in people's paths that wouldn't be there but for government. I mean, it's very hard now for someone just to get a job because we've made it so difficult to employ people. If you want to go out and hire people, the government says, well, here's a minimum wage. You can't hire somebody if they have very low skills and they're worth less than the minimum wage. So immediately you price a lot of people out of the labor market because they're not worth the minimum wage. You might hire them if you could do it at $4 an hour, but you won't do it at $9 an hour. Now you might say, well, why would somebody work at $4 an hour? Well, they have no skills and they want to get some skills. And if you have no skills and you want to get some skills, the best way to get them is to get a job and learn them. In many cases, you're paying somebody $4 an hour to teach them how to do something. But once they learn how to do it, you have to pay them more money or they're going to quit and they're going to go someplace else. But we also have all these employment taxes that increase employment costs, make it more expensive to hire people, Social Security, unemployment. And then we also empower workers where you can sue your boss 8 ways from Sunday. I mean, one of the easiest things to do in America is sue your boss. And that means that people are reluctant to hire. Who the hell wants to get sued? A lot fewer people get hired because the employer doesn't want to risk a lawsuit. And this is particularly problematic for minorities who may have a greater tendency to sue because they could bring up discrimination and stuff like that. It's so easy to claim. Different things you could say are somebody assaulted me at work. I mean, employers want to reduce their legal liability and they do that by hiring fewer people, by outsourcing to other countries, by automating where they might prefer a human, but the computer can't sue them. So the government has just made it very difficult for people to climb up the economic ladder because in many cases, the first few rungs of that ladder have been destroyed by the government. If we could just have a free country, when my grandfather came to this country, they didn't have any of these laws. There was no minimum wage. There was no welfare. There was no unemployment. There was no Social Security. He came with nothing. He didn't even speak the language. He was like 12 or 13, but he got a job right away. And then eventually he had his own little business and he employed people, but he didn't have to do all this with his employees either. I mean, I don't even think he kept track of how much money he made because why keep track? There's no taxes to pay. It was a free country, right? You could concentrate on running your business, not figuring out how much you had to cut the government in on. The only taxes were sales taxes. They didn't have income taxes. They didn't have Social Security taxes. The only taxes you had was like a tariff. You didn't even see the tariffs, right? Because they were embedded in the products. And the cities, the locals, they did have like sales tax, but that's it. That's all there was. Nobody had to fill out forms. Nobody had any money taking out of their paycheck. That's what America used to be like. And people weren't starving. People weren't dying for lack of medical care. If you didn't have money, doctors worked for nothing. We ran great. Government was tiny 100 years ago, 1900, 1890, 1910. Now, we didn't have as much technology then as we have now, but can you imagine if the government had stayed in the same relative size that it was in 1900? If we never had an income tax, corporate income tax, personal income tax, we never had all these government programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, right? If we had just stayed the same, you wouldn't even recognize America today. We would be so wealthy, it would be unrecognizable. The living standard of the average American would be unlike anything that we see today on earth. But we were robbed of all of those benefits because we gave up on capitalism and we went all in almost on socialism, and we really transformed the nation. And we've all suffered, whether we realize it or not. The freest period of time in American history, really, was from the end of the Civil War to the beginning of the First World War. That was really when we were the freest, right? No more slavery, so African Americans had been freed. We were on a very, very solid gold standard during that period of time. That was the Industrial Revolution. You've never seen a period of time where real incomes rose faster, where real GDP grew faster than during those years. And that's when we had the least amount of government really in history. Look, the conditions to achieve success exist naturally. All the government can do is diminish those conditions by imposing barriers. Now, it's not that I'm saying, hey, we shouldn't have any laws. The local government, yeah, should it be illegal to defraud somebody? Yes. We shouldn't just, hey, you can commit crimes as long as you get away with it. No, because in a free market, you can do whatever you want. You just can't harm somebody else. I can't deliberately steal your stuff. Theft is wrong. I have to earn money. I can't steal your money, which means I can't defraud you out of your money. That's still a crime. I still want to punish criminal behavior because everybody has to respect everybody else's rights. Like my freedom to move my fist stops at your face. I can do whatever I want with my fist. I just can't hit you. The minute I hit you, I violated your rights. We have to leave each other alone. But that doesn't mean that if I see somebody starving on the street, I'm going to leave them alone. I'm a human being. I'm going to care about my fellow man. See, I have no problem with voluntary charity. And we had plenty of that before the government took it over. You talk about doctors. Doctors did so much pro bono stuff for free when they didn't have to pay income taxes. They didn't have all these other paperwork and forms, that they could actually be doctors instead of government bureaucrats. They had a lot more free time and they didn't have to charge as much for their services. But people should be free to voluntarily donate money to people in need and help them out. What is wrong is when the government steals money from somebody because they claim somebody else needs it. That's wrong. Theft is immoral just because the government is doing the stealing. And if you rob from the rich and give to the poor, it's still wrong. Even if the poor need the money, the ends don't justify the means. The rich have to voluntarily donate to the poor, which they will. But here is the unfortunate reality of government running charity. Every government has a huge bureaucracy. So in order for a government to give the poor 10 cents, they have to take $1 from everybody else. It's very inefficient. But if you look at private charities, they raise $1 and the poor get 90 cents. It's a much more efficient way to help people if you keep the government out of it. Plus, and this is probably the more important factor, the government wants to perpetuate poverty because they want to perpetuate their own existence. So if you're in charge of this anti-poverty program, the last thing you want is to eliminate poverty because you're out of a job. Your job is, I want more poverty so I can get a bigger budget. And so they design these welfare systems that create dependency. But a private charity doesn't want the people to stay poor. It wants them to not need the charity anymore. It wants to give them a hand up, not a hand out. You want the private sector to be doing these things. You don't want to turn over this function to government. There's a few things that I think government can do well, but charity is not one of them. Neither is education, neither is healthcare. Those are things where the government should stay completely out because all they do is screw it up. The inherent flaw isn't capitalism, it's democracy. So if you have a democracy and capitalism, then you're going to have that because it's the voters that are falling victim to the politicians that say, hey, look at that guy's richer than you. That's not fair. Let's take some of his money and then you're more deserving, right? And the public doesn't get it and they vote for this. But the capitalism itself is not creating the problem. It's creating the prosperity that enables the politicians to now play on people's greed and their envy and all the lowest common denominator. What people have to do is they have to position themselves now against that consensus by buying non-dollar assets, by buying dividend-paying stocks around the world in the countries that I think are in best position to thrive in a post-US dollar reserve currency environment. Because America has benefited from the dollar being the reserve currency at somebody else's expense. We get to live beyond our means, but that's only because other people have been content to live beneath their means. When America's standard of living goes down because we can no longer just claim so much of the world's production with our printing press, other people are going to see their standard of living go up. They're going to consume the stuff that Americans can no longer afford. And so I want to be invested and have exposure to the economies that are going to expand as ours contracts. Countries that have freer economies, smaller welfare states, sounder fiscal policy, trade surpluses, stuff like that. that. And I want to own real resources. I think in the inflationary environment that we're in, you want to own energy related investments, agriculture, metals, industrial metals, and in particular, precious metals. I think that what's going to replace the dollar as the primary monetary reserve asset, it's not going to be another currency. It's not going to be the pound. It's not going to be the euro. It's not going to be the Japanese yen. It's not going to be the Chinese RMB. It's going to be gold, because none of those currencies have what it takes. They all have problems. And a lot of people just assume that the dollar is going to reign supreme because they don't see another currency that could take its place. They're ignoring gold. Gold isn't a currency. Gold is money. And before the dollar was the reserve currency, it wasn't the pound. It was gold. Gold was the reserve for every currency, including the dollar, up until 1971. And when we did Bretton Woods, which is where the dollar really became the reserve, back then it was backed by gold. The dollar was as good as gold. If you had dollars, you had gold. If you had $35, you had an ounce of gold. You could take those dollars to the United States and they would redeem them with an ounce of gold. Give them $35, you get an ounce of gold. It was gold that backed up the dollar, and that's why the rest of the world agreed to use it as the reserve. To use it as the reserve. To use it as the reserve.